Hi, my name is Brett Hoffman, and today we'll be doing my week one stand-up and sprint review for our project Deepfather. Here on the rubric, I will quickly go over the questions that are asked of me as far as the stand-up video goes. As far as what I've worked on over the last week, I spent plenty of time making the rest of the maps for the overworld areas, as well as spending time making adjustments to previous maps I had made for the project with a better idea of how certain things such as the gathering systems will work, as well as how enemy AI and certain fights will work. To that extent, I have also put a little bit of time into making the white box outline, which generally just goes over what we need in the white box and what the intent is for those things to be tested. Over the next week, I'll be working closely with my teammate Jake Fusco on the white box itself, as well as working a little bit more on making the interior maps for things like planned in-game dungeons, closer looks at the in-game villages, as well as interior houses, for the sake of design and planning for those level layouts. The only thing that happens to be standing in my way right now is a little bit of stress and confusion regarding certain classes, trying to work on stuff online between the rest of my group members, and just communication in general. Things like being able to plan ahead with what other people are doing, as well as working simultaneously on different parts of this project are problems within the group right now that I hope are fixed soon. In the event that they're not, then work may be a little bit slow coming out based on what is and is not done by people based on what our expectations are. As far as the last week, some of the challenges that I had to overcome in doing this was trying to get as much visual clarity out as far as drawing the maps that I worked on. I don't happen to be a very talented artist, so my end goal was to create a map that was at least semi-visually appealing and displayed all the information needed from a design standpoint. As far as our group as a whole, I think we're doing very well. We happen to start a few weeks earlier than the class even began. Unfortunately, the reality of that is that the current sprints, as we are waiting for the white box to be finished, leave a little bit less work for me to be doing in my spare time. And to that extent, I expect that as soon as the white box is done and we have a more solid grasp on how things like the enemy AI as well as combat system as a whole will play out, I will be able to work a little bit more on how those systems work and how that will incorporate into the level design as the team's primary level designer. Moving on to examples of the work I've done this week, we have the Sea of Dagon here. This was done in roughly a couple hours, just from scratch, complete with markings that tie into the caves underneath. All of these water puddles are supposed to be areas where the player can dive down into the caves. The puddle here marked F will lead into the dungeon of the area, and to that extent, because we're unsure about what units to use inside of Unreal and how well it would feel out, all of my maps are marked with a general idea of how long it would take to cross, clear like shorelines and the radius or the diameter of specific islands. In some cases, like the 45 seconds down here, that would be the time it takes for the player to cross from this end of this island to the other. We agreed upon this as a means of being able to sort of feel things out and come back to it later, as far as when we find out what the actual dimensions of our world we want. The idea of the game itself is supposed to be 3 extremely open, wide areas that the player is able to explore uh, to a grand degree. Our final project is planned to have at least one of these areas implemented, since we don't expect to get around all 3. Moving on to other stuff I've worked on this week, this is the caves underneath the Sea of Dagon. All of the puddles are marked in white with the corresponding letter to the one that it should have, as well as a little bit of pathing and just theory crafting for what would happen inside these caves. Um, the general idea around that was to simply create an area that was a little bit vertical, having 2 different layers where the player would have to explore both to be able to get a full idea of the area. I also went back this week and adjusted the Ling Highlands map, added some color and explanations to a few things. The player initially comes out of a portal here and is set along a path where they come into contact with a spider tribe down here in the south before being able to come back up to the main town of the area. And I'm uncertain of exactly how it's going to play out, but I was told that the Wyverns area would be more of an endgame place for the player to find higher grade materials and fight tougher bosses. So that is set up to have a few more gathering points than normal, which are these green dots, as well as an arena down at the bottom. And in the skybox of this area, since this is going to be the planned place for the main villain, the Necromancer's tower, we decided that it would be visible at all times in the skybox, sort of looming over the area as the player explores it. And then lastly, as far as things I've done this week, we have the documentation for the plans for white box texting, as well as a translation into what the level requirements would be. This is just an idea to sort of get me and Jake prepared for what we need to have in the white box. We've spent a little bit of time in Unreal creating rudimentary UI elements, as well as planning out a white box, but I decided to come back and create a really concrete plan that tests everything that we should need for the game, including collision on geometry, proper UI elements for both the weapons, the player's health and mana, as well as enemy HP, and other such basic things that we could test with a white box. And to that extent, that is all the work I've done this week. Thank you very much for watching.